Prop 139, which ensures abortion rights in Arizona, passed by a large margin Tuesday. The results are not official, but the nearly 2-to-1 margin in favor of the proposed amendment indicates that access to abortion in Arizona will be protected 2 years after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Joining us now is attorney Chris Love, spokesperson for the campaign in support of Prop 139. Good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Why do you think Prop 139 passed, and by such a margin?
Well, I think after the fall of Roe versus Wade, Americans, by and large, had decided that they wanted to have a say in whether or not abortion rights should be extended state by state after that ruling. And here we've seen a groundswell of support since the beginning of our campaign, and that carried through to the campaign, and that's reflected in the win number that we had last night.
Yeah, we had a couple on Tuesday.
Tuesday, geez.
Yeah. Time passes.
It sure does.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though, but I mean, you had a record number of signatures gathered, spent a record amount of money for a ballot measure, all of which indicates that, again, y'all are hitting the ground running here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we had a lot of tailwinds to follow from, Ohio and Michigan. And we've seen time and again that when abortion is on the ballot, it wins.
What does Prop 139 call for?
It will enshrine the fundamental right to abortion in our state constitution up until fetal viability. And it puts the decisions about abortion back in the hands of pregnant patients and their medical providers and takes the government out of the equation.
And I know that we've talked about this a lot beforehand with both pro and against, but the viability is determined by a health provider, as you mentioned. Is that a requirement? That the health provider is required to determine viability?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So what will happen is a pregnant person will make that decision in conjunction with the good faith advice of the healthcare provider, right? And then they will make a determination as to whether that patient will move forward with abortion care or not.
Define healthcare provider.
So in the state of Arizona, currently, only physicians are allowed to perform abortions.
Okay, so this it sounds quite similar to Roe v. Wade. Close on, I mean, how close?
Right on the nose, right? What we wanted to do was return to the standard that we had enjoyed for about 50 years before Roe was overturned. And the language is clear. It is essentially returning back to Roe versus Wade.
Now, again, and this is when we had the opponents on, they kind of concentrated on this part. Abortions are allowed after viability when necessary. An example of when that would be necessary.
Well, abortions have always been available post-viability when necessary. And in our language, it says when to protect the life and the health of the pregnant person. And so that determination would need to be made by their treating healthcare provider.
And we had opponents on, not that there's debate anymore, this is passed and it's a done deal, but they had problems with the mental health aspect. How is that defined and how is that worked out?
Those decisions need to be made between the pregnant person and the healthcare provider. I'm not a mental health care provider, obviously, but there are instances where those patients will need to seek abortion services. And so this amendment allows those decisions to be made by the patient and their provider.
And so when the opponents argued, and apparently unsuccessfully, but they argued that this would still allow abortions up to birth. They kind of concentrated on that when obviously that would be extraordinary, but it would be allowed in a rare circumstances, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'll parse that and say there's no such thing as abortion up until birth. I think that that's some fear mongering that the other side of the equation has been making for a long time. What we are really trying to do is put private and personal health care decisions back into the hands of the patients and their providers and keep politicians and government out. It's really that simple.
And the current law, abortion is allowed up to 15 weeks. No exceptions, though, for rape and incest. This blows that out, correct?
Well, what will happen is there will need to be a challenge to that 15-week ban based upon the constitutional amendment that will be placed into law very shortly after certification.
When does the amendment become law?
So it will become law when the governor actually signs off on it.
What are you hearing from women I mean, we've done interviews with folks, and we've seen interviews at polling places. PBS NewsHour did an interview at a local polling place, and a woman was crying because she had a chance to vote on something like that. What are you hearing from women?
I mean, we're hearing a lot of thank yous, right? We're hearing from young people who are just considering starting their families for the first time, thanking us for leaving all of the options to them available. We're hearing from older folks who were, marching in the 60s and 70s for this right, thanking us for doing this thing. And so we've just heard a debt of gratitude from the people of Arizona.
And as far as the campaign is concerned, you were front and center for the campaign. When you got started, did the process itself, did it go as you expected?
I think that it went better than I could even have imagined, quite frankly. I think we saw across the country that, again, when abortion is on the ballot, it won. And I knew it would win here in Arizona, but just the groundswell of support that we received throughout this process. We broke records. We made Arizona history here with this campaign, and I just couldn't be more proud of this effort.
Does it surprise you in any way that this effort, your effort, won by such a substantial margin, and yet Donald Trump won presidency? We're going to talk about Prop 314, which is an immigration measure that some folks very much were opposed. It seemed like voters were all over the map, doesn't it?
Yeah, yes, I will say that, but I will tell you that our campaign spoke across the political spectrum. So we were talking to everyone, regardless of their political affiliation, their age range, any other kind of demographic that you can think of. And the message was clear. These personal and private decisions should remain between the pregnant person and their healthcare provider. And they don't want politicians making these decisions for them. And that spoke across the board.
And last point here, as you mentioned earlier on, Roe v. Wade really made a difference, didn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that it was shorthand for us. We could refer people back to Roe versus Wade and tell them, this was the law of the land for 50 years before the Supreme Court made the decision to overturn it. So it was really easy to explain what we were doing based upon Roe.
All right, Chris Love, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.